you would turn to Revelation 17, we're going to continue our verse-by-verse study through Revelation. And that's just what we've been doing. We've been studying through the book of Revelation, verse by verse. We're getting close to the end here. But one thing that we realize as we study the Bible, as we continue to make our way and look at passages old and new, is that we realize the Bible could rightly be called a tale of two cities, like that great Dickens classic, because throughout the Bible, two cities are juxtapositioned to each other. There is Jerusalem, the city of God, and there is Babylon, the city of rebellion. And it's the best of cities, as we're going to see when we finish Revelation. There's a new Jerusalem. But it's also Babylon is the worst of cities. And chapter 17 and 18 together record the fall of Babylon. Now, if you have been with us in our study through Revelation for the last several months, really, as we've made our way through, we've been studying this time period known as the tribulation, this 7-year period in human history in which God pours out his righteous wrath on a Christ-rejecting and sinful world, on a world that says, we don't want you, get out of our life, we reject you, we're rebelling against you, we don't want anything to do with Jesus. And the Lord submits to that in a way and pours out his wrath upon the world. And we've seen, as we've made our way through, there's 3 sets of 7 that this wrath is pictured as. There's 7 seals that are broken. There's then 7 trumpets that are blown. And then finally, there's 7 bowls that are poured out. And the wrath is pictured as inside these bowls. The last time we were together, we finished the 7th bowl, and chronologically now, as we come to chapter 17, we've essentially made our way through the bulk of the tribulation. But before we begin to talk about the final battle of Armageddon, or Christ's 1,000-year millennial reign, or the final outcast of Satan and his judgment, the Bible addresses the fall of Mystery Babylon, as it says in our text this morning. Now, mystery biblically means something that has yet to be revealed. It's not like Matlock or something, like a whodunit, right? Or a Sherlock Holmes type of thing. Biblically, a mystery is something that has yet to be revealed, but will be revealed to those who are spiritually discerned. They will have the ability to understand and see what this is. And so Mystery Babylon, that has yet to be revealed, is this future humanistic world system, which in John's day, as he's writing this in the 1st century, that probably seemed like an impossibility. How can there be a one world system? But in our day, here now 2,000 years later, it feels like this is right around the corner. And this mystery is about to be revealed. It's not going to be a mystery much longer. Now, Mystery Babylon, again, we're going to be talking about Mystery Babylon for a couple weeks, and there's kind of 2 aspects to it, and we'll see that today. There's a religious aspect of what we call Mystery Babylon, which it's probably not that religious, but it's definitely spiritual. It's got its own belief system, its own values, this end time belief system of its own, right? And so this one world humanistic system is going to write its own set of morality, its own collective standard of what's right and wrong. And we're right there, right? I mean, collectively, the world decides who gets canceled and who doesn't. That's right, that's wrong. It's groupthink, and that's only going to enhance as we continue marching towards these days. And so there's this spiritual, moral belief system aspect to Mystery Babylon, but there's also a political and economic aspect to it, that this last days system is going to possess great influence and power and have governing authority that's going to be fueled by the economy. And as we'll see today in our text, and as we probably see already when we look around at the world, is that those lines get blurred. What's right and wrong generally seems to be decided by groupthink. Who's right, who's wrong, what's right, what's wrong. Collectively, that's decided, and it seems to be decided by the powers that be, by economics. Like there's motives behind all of that. And so we see both sides of this right now in our world today, and all of that's just going to rise to the surface even more as we approach these days that are described in Revelation. Now, we're going to look at this over the next 2 weeks in chapter 17 and 18. This morning, though, we're going to look at the first part of this, the fall of spiritual or religious Babylon. Let me remind you one more thing before we pick up in verse 1. At this point in Revelation, all true believers have been caught up in the rapture. In chapter 4, it said that John seeing a door open in heaven and a voice like a trumpet saying, "Come up here," and we are caught up. Then what remains during this tribulation period, when we think of religious practices, genuine true believers that trust in the grace of Jesus Christ, they're gone and caught up. But the religious practices themselves, the religious structures and church bodies and church government, that still exists. The saints are gone, but the structures of the religious systems are still in place on earth. And so John is given an invitation here in chapter 17 to see how this religious system, this value system that remains, is judged. It says in verse 1, one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." Over 100 years ago, there was a young woman, and her name was Mae West, and she began her career in theater and the movies. She's considered the original naughty girl of show business. It is said that she climbed the ladder of stardom and success, not rung by rung, but wrong by wrong. She wrote and starred in films such as Sex, Pleasure Man, The Wicked Age, The Constant Sinner. And she didn't try to hide her promiscuity. Among her not so classy quotes, she said, "If I have 10 men waiting at my door, send one of them home because I'll be tired." She said, "Between two evils, I always pick the one that I haven't tried yet." And by her own admission, she said, "I've been in more laps than a napkin." By her own admission, Mae West was a woman that became popular through promiscuity. She became an idol to Americans through her immorality. She gained her fame through fornication. And in Revelation 17, we could say we have the Mae West of the Bible. And she is a tramp of biblical proportions. As it says in the New King James Version here, she's the great harlot. Literally, she's a mega prostitute. Some of you may have the King James Version before you, which bluntly calls her the great whore. It's a shocking description. It's meant to make the reader, to make us feel uncomfortable. It's meant to show us how appalling what she's involved in is to God. And it's so very important to show us that we never want to be involved in what she's involved in. This is the great whore. I want to stay away from that. It's appalling to God. I don't want any of that. But without the restraining presence of the church in the world, because we've been caught up, There's no shortage of suitors for this great harlot. And so the first thing that the angel tells John is that she has a global influence. She's been around. It says she sits on many waters. Look down with me towards the end of the chapter in verse 15. We don't have to guess what the many waters are. The angel tells John, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. This harlot, this whore, has this universal, global, ecumenical feel to her. She sits on many waters, multitudes, nations, tongues, peoples. And so the woman that we're going to read about, that's also on this beast, is the belief system that's going to dominate the world during this tribulation time. She is, it says in verse 2, and we're going to see how that's kind of all intermingled here, this belief system. She is, verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. In this chapter alone, we read the word harlot, or if your translation says something else, 3 different times. We read fornication twice here. We read it again later on in this chapter. But throughout the Bible, all the way through, biblically, prostitution and fornication are used as metaphors to describe worshiping something other than God. That's spiritual infidelity, to worship something other than God. In the Old Testament, Israel is called the wife of God, the wife of Jehovah. In the New Testament, the church is called the chaste bride of Christ. He's got this tender, legitimate love and affection for his own, old and new. But if in the Old Testament, if Israel and the church in the New Testament, when we turn their backs on God and embrace and run into the arms of another, they give their affection to another, God compares that to someone cheating on him. You left me. That's what the whole book of Hosea is about. The prophet is told to live this out, that his wife Gomer, she's the prostitute. And I want you to picture my relationship with Israel by marrying her, even though she runs out on you. And what we learn as we study through Scripture is that we all worship something. God has created us. He's made us to be worshipers. And we're always giving ourselves over to something. But if we're not giving ourselves and embracing God, we're giving ourselves over and embracing something else in our life. It could be your career. It could be toys that you'd like to, have, your little hobbies, your things, pleasure, self, gratification, relationships. We're worshipers. We all worship something. And we can tell what that is by where we spend our time, where we spend our talents, where we spend our treasures. What determines the choices that we make, what we bow our will to. That's our God. That's what we're worshiping. And when that's not the one true God, he views that as you're cheating on me. You left me for another. And whatever those are that are out there, that are worshiped, all those things that draw people away from worshiping God, they find their beginnings with this great harlot. That's why she's a great harlot, because she's behind all of that. And here, at this point in Revelation, these kings, it says here, the earth's world leaders, they're drunk with, it says. They're under the influence. They're intoxicated with her value system. And it's not so much that they love her value system, but they love what she has to offer, right? Because prostitutes offer something. And so for political gain, these kings, these leaders are going to be embedded with this world system that furthers their own agenda, that gets them to where they want to be. And so since this is going to be the accepted system of right and wrong, it's going to come across to the masses as spiritual and attractive and good, though it's not necessarily moral. In fact, it needs to be judged. And so John is told to come see the judgment. Verse 3, so he, the angel, carried me away in the spirit to the wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The next thing that we notice about this woman not only is her global influence, but that she uses and is used by the Antichrist. And we know that that's who's being referred to. Again, if you've been with us in our study of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 13, you could maybe write that down in your margins here to help jog your memory later. It says in chapter 13 that John says, I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his 10 horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. So this same beastly creature that we're reading about here in chapter 17 was introduced to us in chapter 13 as the Antichrist and his whole political system that he has set up. Now, John's going to talk more about these heads and horns later in the passage and thoroughly confuse us very well. But the point that he makes right now is that this harlot that has a global influence uses and is used by the Antichrist. I want to show you this. John says here he sees her riding the beast. And we could say, if we imagine this in our mind, whatever this might look like, or as John is seeing this unique sight, that this harlot, this prostitute, this religious system is controlling the beast. The beast is supporting her, getting her where she needs to go. This belief system wants to expand and do more, and she is on that. But on the other hand, by definition, she's a harlot. She's a prostitute. Prostitutes are used. Prostitutes are abused. And so this beast is using the harlot to get what he wants. He's using the belief system of the masses to further his own agenda. And this isn't out of the realm of possibility, right? This happens in politics today. Now, as we're going to see as we go along, even in this chapter, the harlot is using the beast and the beast is using the harlot. They're using one another. So after giving this brief description, John goes on and gives more details about the harlot in verse 4. It says, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup. Everything is good up to this point, but in that golden cup, it's full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. Prostitutes, and this prostitute presents herself in a way that attracts desire, in a way that generates and creates lust. Her outward appearance is attractive. It's purple, it's scarlet, it speaks of royalty, power, authority. She's got gold, precious stones. There's influence, there's affluence. She promises all of it if you come and embrace this belief system. And as we are going to see, she's going to promise all this satisfaction, but inside her cup, everything else looks good. But inside, what can't be seen from the outside is emptiness, it's filth, it's wickedness, it's an abomination. And so John, as he sees this, he tells us this harlot about what she does and where she sits and what she wears. And now he tells us her name. It says in verse 5, on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. There is no mistaking this woman's identity. It is right across her forehead. She has a name, and it's a name with a history. She's Babylon the Great. She's the mother of harlots. All this infidelity spiritually, all this spiritual idolatry is conceived within her. She's the mother of all of that. And this Babylonian mother has been around for a long, long time. You can trace her beginnings all the way back to Genesis. And I'd encourage you, if you would, to turn to Genesis chapter 10. And again, if you've been with us through our study of Revelation, we've kind of mentioned Revelation 10, 11 in passing. But let's go there and study and see what it has to say. Now, when you get to Genesis chapter 10, it's probably not what you'll read in your devotional reading. It's called the Table of Nations. And so not maybe a lot of devotional material for you, but it does give us a detailed account of the offspring of Noah. Noah and his wife had 3 sons and their wives, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and we're all related to them. I was just mentioning with Chris this past week, talking about the blood drive that's tomorrow, and I don't know, I've got a curious mind. And I was like, how many blood types are there? And he didn't know, and I didn't know. I'm sure a lot of you guys know, but I don't know. Who knows? Google knows. Google, how many blood types are there? And it says there's 4 main types of blood types. And I'm like, oh, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then I read on and it said, but there's 8 total types altogether. I'm like, oh, they're wives. I thought that was pretty interesting. That's a freebie for you. Anyway. But one of these descendants that we're going to read about, the great grandson of Noah, is a man by the name of Nimrod. And Nimrod becomes the first world leader, the first dictator, the first one with aspirations to rule the world. But Nimrod's name is from the Hebrew word marad, which means rebel. And when you put an N in front of it, Nimrod, the N is a definite article. It's like saying the. Nimrod's name is the rebel. And so already, back here in Genesis, as we read through and we see who this character is and what he's about and what his motives are, we get a glimpse and a picture and a type of the Antichrist. So Noah had these 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Let's look at verse 6 of chapter 10, and it says the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, Sabteka, and the sons of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Verse 8, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, when it says a mighty hunter before the Lord, some of you guys are like, hey, that's my man, right? This guy can sit in a duck blind all day and just knock him out. 1, 2, 3, nothing to it, right? He's a mighty hunter. Or maybe he's out there. I remember Aaron. Where's Aaron? I just saw you. I remember Aaron at last year's men's retreat. I don't know if you guys remember this, but we got warned that there's a cougar in the area. It was so great. I'll never forget this moment. And so we're having, this is unscripted, we're having lunch in the dining hall. And if you've been up to Lazy F, there's big glass windows. And there goes Aaron with his rifle over his shoulder, heading out. I'm going to go find this cougar. I'm going to start calling you Nimrod, Aaron. No, I'm just joking. I'm joking. Okay. So, but when it says a mighty hunter, it's not in that sense. And it's not before, like God sees him. It's like in the face of, against. He's a mighty hunter against the Lord. Who is? Nimrod, the rebel. He's the rebel in the face of God. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of the rebel's kingdom was Babel. And it goes on to mention Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and the land of Shinar. So Nimrod, the rebel, set himself up against God and his people, a mighty hunter before the Lord, and he set up his base in Babel, the founder of what would become what we call Babylon. It's in present-day Iraq. Now, skip down to chapter 11, if you're still there in Genesis. In chapter 11, it begins telling the story about the rebel's kingdom. This is post-flood, about 150 years ago or so. It says, chapter 11, verse 1, now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone. They had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. In chapter 9 of Genesis, as Noah and his sons and their wives disembarked from the ark, said, go, fill the earth. But under the leadership of the rebel, under Nimrod, there's this direct, intentional, organized rebellion to God's plan. No, not fill the earth, not spread out. Let's gather. Let's build. Let's make a name for ourselves. We can even hear all the way back in Genesis this same humanistic overtones that are going to be so prevalent. We already feel it today, right? These humanistic overtones are going to be prevalent in the tribulation period. And so collectively, as you continue on, they construct this tower in Babel. Most likely it's a ziggurat. It's a structure that's dedicated to the study, but not only the study, the worship of the stars and the heavenlies. It was a way to get to heaven. But it's not in the way that God prescribed. This is in rebellion. This is a false religion. This is a counterfeit religion. Because true faith, the faith of the Bible, is God saying, I have made a way. I've come down to where you are. And religion is always saying, I can do something and get up to where you are. It's the opposite. This true faith, God says, I'm coming to where you are, and I've made a way. And religion says, no, I can find my own way. I'll make a name for myself. And if we had more time, I'd love to get into this. I love the history of how this false counterfeit religion that began with Nimrod in Babel transferred to Babylon and then transferred to Pergamus and then transferred into Rome and the Roman Empire, and it spread eventually throughout the world. And right now there are hundreds and hundreds, thousands of religious systems. But even if the people that you meet in this world are not part of a religious system, we're worshipers, right? And so our world will tell us, come to God on your own terms. Whatever God is, get there on your own terms. There's many ways to encounter God, right? But there's only one way to the Father, and that is through Jesus. And Jesus didn't say, I'm one of 1,000 ways, or just if you're comfortable with me, I'm an option. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me. The only way is to enter into everlasting life, is to turn from sin and turn to Jesus. It's to repent and turn to him, the way. Every other way is the wrong way. And it had its beginnings all the way back here in Babylon, because she is the mother of harlots. But Babylon, this mother of harlots, not only leads people from the truth, she attempts to destroy the truth. She persecutes the truth. Look at verse 6 back in Revelation chapter 17. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. So again, the church is off the scene, but those who come to faith in Jesus during this time of tribulation, there's going to be some that genuinely realize, man, those that you've witnessed to and they never accepted Jesus, once we're gone, I need him. And they're going to accept Jesus. But don't wait until that point, because it's going to be hard. As it says here, they're martyrs. The believers that come to faith during this time period are going to be persecuted and martyred by the Antichrist and by his this religious system. Because this religious system, the value system collectively the world has, is tolerant of everything except followers of Jesus. And so John sees this incredible persecution, this martyrdom, and he says, I marveled with great amazement. And it's not because John didn't know persecution. As he writes this, he's a religious exile himself. But he's never seen anything like this. And so the angel, verse 7, said to me, why did you marvel? I'll tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Like, oh, great. Thankfully, we got an interpretation here. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell in the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not yet. Thank you so much for clearing that up for me, angel. The angel is saying that this false religious system, what he's saying is she aligns herself with those in authority. And so these next few verses are less about the woman and a little bit more about the beast. The 7-headed, 10-horned beast, the Antichrist, this political system, we talked about this. He gets his power from Satan, and the world is going to be enamored with him, including this belief system, including the harlot. But I want us to notice, before we move on, when we first saw the harlot and the beast, she was riding the beast. It seemed as though she was in control. But now, if you'll notice, I don't think this is a minor thing. Now it says the beast is depicted as carrying the woman. There's a big difference between riding something and being carried and carrying something. It would seem that the Antichrist is using this harlot to further his own agenda at this point. And so the angel goes on and says in verse 9, "Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits." Now, the 7 mountains could refer to the city of Rome, which sits on 7 hills, and the Antichrist political system is a revived Roman Empire, and I would fall into that category. I think that's what's being described here. But it also mentions 7 in verse 10. It says there's also 7 kings, and so there's 7 heads and 7 mountains. Now there's 7 kings. Verse 10, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. It sounds like an algebra problem. Okay, great. Where's the parentheses? And when he comes, he must continue a short time. Now, I'll just say, this isn't just an out, it's the truth. This is some of the most difficult passages that there are, and most would agree, that scholars agree, this is the most challenging portion of Revelation. But it seems to be what he's describing very similar maybe to what Daniel prophesied over 600 years before this. If you remember in Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar had this dream about a statue, and each portion of the statue was made out of a different material that represented an empire. And so here, these kings, perhaps it's something like this. And so it says the 5 who have fallen seems to be the fact that as John writes this, there's 5 world empires that are in the past tense. Egypt was a world empire. Assyria was a world empire. Babylon was a world empire. The Medo-Persians were a world empire. And Greece. There's 5 that was. But as John writes this, 1 is. He's in the Roman Empire right now that has control of the world. And then there's another that has not yet come. This future one world empire, this revived Roman Empire that's going to be under the control of the Antichrist. Now, regardless of who these 7 are, bless you, the beast is clearly identified as the 8th king. In verse 11, it says, the beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th and is of the 7th and is going to perdition. Okay, confusing stuff, but it would seem, again, anybody, I've said this before, anybody that tells you this is exactly what every portion of Revelation says is lying to you, okay? But it would seem that we're speaking again of like this halfway point, this monumental 3.5-year point of the tribulation that we studied back again in Revelation chapter 13. Because in Revelation 13, verse 3, we learn something remarkable about the Antichrist. It says, John says, I saw one of his heads as it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound, because it's mortal, and deadly, but it was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. There's like this, the beast has this pseudo-resurrection. And so he was, and then he died. He was mortally wounded, deadly wound, but then he was healed. And so he's the seventh ruler, it would seem, mortally wounded. He's healed. And now he becomes again the eighth king. So it's a difficult passage as it is. The Antichrist end is certain. It says he's going to perdition. He's going to waste. He's going to be wasted. He's going to be destroyed. And then verse 12 says the 10 horns, more of a math problem, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour or for a period of time as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So there's 7 kingdoms, 5 were, 1 is, 1 to come, 7 kings. The Antichrist is the 7th and 8th, and now we have 10 horns and 10 kings to deal with. But we're told here that these 10 kings are not yet. We're not talking about empires or rulers from the past. This is future tense. And it's these future leaders are going to align themselves with the Antichrist. They're going to work with and give their authority to and work under the authority of the Antichrist for one agenda. Verse 14, these will make war with the Lamb. You give your authority to the Antichrist, he's the Antichrist. He's against the Lamb. That's the only goal. That's the only objective. But, it's a big but, best part of the chapter, the Lamb will overcome them. Amen? Why? For he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Guys, that's us. This is us. That's the church. We're chosen and faithful. We're going to read in chapter 19, the church returns with him. And verse 17, then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits with the peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Again, this global influence that this harlot, this religious belief system has. And but this harlot, this beast in the kingdom, they've had this use and abuse relationship. But we're going to see she's eventually destroyed by the beast's empire. It says in verse 16, and the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, this political empire, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. At some point in the tribulation, again, I believe personally, it's at this 3.5 year, this monumental halfway point of the tribulation, the political system turns on the world's belief system. It served its purpose. You're no longer needed. And she's eliminated. Why? Look at this, verse 17. For God has put it into their, who? The 10 kings' hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind and to give their kingdom to the beast. God put it in their hearts until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. The beast got what he wanted from this false religious system. He came in search of power and a one world government, and he understood that I can't really have a one world government until people are unified with their belief system. And so, like, it can't be a kingdom that the people in Indonesia have the same, if they have a different belief system than Canadians and those in Ellensburg and Seattle. To be unified, there has to be one belief system. And so he sees this, and like many politicians today, he uses religion as a means to an end, to gain authority, to gain power and control. And then at this halfway point, he says, I used the religious card, I did all that, but I did it for myself. And now I've accomplished what I've wanted to accomplish with the world's belief system. And again, I think it's at this 3.5 year point of the tribulation, which in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it says, the man of sin, speaking about the Antichrist, is revealed, the son of perdition, same terminology, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. This is called, Jesus calls it in Matthew 24 and 25, the abomination that causes desolation. Daniel calls it that as well. That once this power has been consolidated, the Antichrist has no longer any need for the services of this great harlot. And so he's going to look to cast her off and be done with her because he's got what he wants. And for him, it's all about him. I lusted after power. I understand the belief system is something I could use and abuse to get that. I got what I wanted, and I'm done. Now, this is what a challenging chapter, right? Man, who's in control? The woman? The beast? No, ultimately, yes. Verse 17 says God is in control. That he uses the beast's system to actually destroy the false religious system. He said he put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose. God uses what the enemy's doing for his purposes to fulfill what he's doing. That's how good our God is. He's going to do it on a grand and global scale at this point. God is building his kingdom. He's got purposes and plans that we can't seem to understand right now. But even though he's doing it in a global sense here, what I want us to remember this morning, practical application, is that there might be something in your life right now that the enemy just seems to be having his way. I don't get it. I question it. I don't understand it. I'm tempted to be overwhelmed by this thing, to fall into fear. What I want us to remember, that when we read a text as challenging as this with the Antichrist and the beast and coming kingdoms and this global religious system, is that God has a plan in your life as well. God has a purpose in your life, and we don't know what tomorrow holds, but God is still in control, and he's worthy of your trust. And though the enemy, as we read, makes war with the Lamb will overcome them because he's the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. Amen.